This is Democracy Watch. So, Mark, things just went from bad to worse for Trump attorney James Trupis, who was just indicted last week as part of the Wisconsin indictment for his role in the 2020 fake elector scheme. What just happened at the hands of the Wisconsin Supreme Court, as far as he's concerned?
So the Wisconsin Supreme Court temporarily suspended him from his position on the committee overseeing judicial conduct. Now, it is an absolute travesty that he was on this. And it's also worth noting, by the way, you said for his part in the fake elector scheme as if somehow he was the only lawyer involved in the fake elector scheme. So, I mean, Jim Trupis is part of a proud group that includes the likes of Rudy Giuliani, Jenna Ellis, John Eastman, Sidney Powell, right? I mean, like, think about the pantheon here that we are talking about with Mr. Trupis.
Now, you had just alluded to this, but the more worrisome part for me is that someone like Jim Trupis was on the Judicial Conduct Advisory Committee in the first place. Does it worry you that people like this are currently in positions of power?
Oh, absolutely. And look, I mean, the fact that he was overseeing judicial ethics in Wisconsin probably tells you everything you need to know about.
Yeah, it's like putting an arsonist in charge of fire safety over the national parks. I mean, what are we doing here?
Right. I mean, so it just like indicates to you what happens in too many places where either there are conservative Supreme Courts or there are conservative legislatures or governors, the amount that they can burrow into a system through committee appointments, through, jobs, through serving on task forces is really astounding. And, we saw this with the election deniers infiltrating state canvassing boards and county canvassing boards in 2020. Well, think about this as kind of like the equivalent of that, right? If you are conservatives in Wisconsin and you want to allow more misconduct by judges and justices in Wisconsin, right? You want to give them a permission structure. What better way than to appoint people to this board that no one's ever heard of, right? I mean, who had ever heard of this board until Jim Trupis came along?
Well, do you think that this will jumpstart some type of proactive look at who sits on these advisory committees in light, of the rot that has pervaded so many attorneys linked to Donald Trump and the Republican Party?
Absolutely, it should. And so this is a place where I think, frankly, Democrats and progressives need to sort of catch up. We focus enormously on who the president of the United States is. That's important. Everyone needs to vote for Joe Biden. We focus in a lot of energy and time and attention on who the governor is. And, members of Congress, Senate, and increasingly there's more attention on who state Supreme Court justices are or who the U.S. Supreme Court justices are or who the state legislative leadership are. But what the other side has done is they have focused on infiltrating and placing their people in boards and commissions and advisory councils, which is how you wind up with states being we need to serve for lunch sugar. They have through their industry friends and big money and groups like the Federalist Society, they just have spent a lot more time focused on boards and commissions and these kinds of things. And it is high time that we realize that this is not just a question of what the rules are for car safety or for food, but this is actually essential to how democracy functions.
Right. And on the point of the media more broadly and Democrats more broadly not really paying attention to this stuff, I found this stuff out just by reading Democracy Docket. So for those who are watching right now, if you want to follow along with the news outlet that Mark founded to focus on everything voting and elections, including this stuff that is monumentally important that just doesn't get covered, please make sure to sign up for Democracy Docket. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Mark, are the states taking any steps right now to root out corrupt lawyers?
So yes, not at the pace that I think they should. And you and I have talked about how Donald Trump has perverted the judicial system to buy himself time and essentially escape accountability or at least delay accountability. And I think to some extent you could say the same is happening with the lawyers. So, look, Rudy Giuliani was suspended immediately in New York, and kudos to New York. He just got suspended and was recommended disbarment in D.C. Eastman has been suspended in California and D.C., and a judge in California says that he should be disbarred. Ellis has been suspended in Colorado. Chesborough has been suspended in California and Massachusetts. That's good. And I don't mean to sell those things short, but everyone needs to get due process. And I'm not trying to deny these lawyers due process. But a lot of these, as you have pointed out in the past and in your question now, a lot of these have been the result of criminal indictments. And the standard for being indicted and being charged with a crime is really high, right? There has to be a criminal law. And the prosecutor has to believe that they can convince a jury to unanimously find beyond a reasonable doubt over the presumption of innocence, right, that you committed a crime. And we are not going to have a functioning democracy if we do not have accountability through all mechanisms for people who undermine democracy. We're not going to have a judicial system if you have judges and justices of the Supreme Court who there's just a sense they're invulnerable and can't be held accountable. And we're also not going to have a functioning legal system if lawyers can engage in this behavior, and unless and until they're like indicted on crimes, they face real consequences. So like I said, kudos to New York and some of these other jurisdictions for moving, but it does feel like we are 3 years plus past the insurrection, and we're still talking about, a recommendation for disbarment or a piggyback on a criminal case. So the bar has, a lot of explaining to do for why these lawyers were able to do what they did to begin with. But I also think bars need to be much more aggressive in rooting this out.
Do you think the rules, for example, should be modernized, kind of analogous to red flag laws, for example, where it doesn't have to meet some super high threshold if we have an indication that a lawyer is doing something untoward or doing something unethical or abusing their license, that action could be taken before some super high threshold is met, which would also give that person so much time to continue committing crimes while we wait for that whole process to play itself out.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because, in some areas of the legal ethics, that is in fact the rule, right? If you, for example, steal client money, then the bar has a very low tolerance for that, and you will get suspended and disbarred relatively quickly. I think what we need is a democracy canon within the bar rules. Like we need to have a rule that says that as a lawyer, you are not just an officer of the court, which there is a rule that says you owe a duty of candor and honesty towards the court. You're not just a fiduciary to your client. We have a rule that says that, right? You owe a duty of loyalty to your client. But we need a rule that says you owe a duty and loyalty to the Constitution and to free and fair elections and democracy. Now, it is a sad commentary that in 2024, we are talking about the need that members of the bar who take an oath need to have a specific rule that says you cannot try to, foment an insurrection. But I unfortunately think that that's what the bar needs. And we have not seen those drafts come out of the bar committees.
And who would be responsible for doing something like that?
So the courts could do it, right? The state Supreme Courts could do it, or the bar committees themselves could do it. But one way or another, Congress could presumably do it. State legislatures could do it. But I think rather than passing the buck to others, I think it is incumbent upon the bars, which are essentially self-regulating in some sense. They're lawyers, policing themselves. When doctors have a problem, you expect the medical establishment to fix it. I think it's time for the big law firms, for the bar associations, for judges, for other civic groups of lawyers to coalesce around this.
And I completely agree, and I think that this isn't the last that we'll hear about this. I think this is a drum that merits continuous beating here. So we'll do exactly that. Again, for those watching right now, if you want to support the work that Marc and his team are doing, please sign up for Democracy Docket. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.